So imagine for a second that you own a highly customized car.
Okay.
And one day you take it to a mechanic because it's, acting up a bit. The mechanic looks it over, nods, and fixes the issue using spare parts that you already bought and paid for, like parts that were sitting right there in your own trunk.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Right. But when it's time to settle up, the mechanic doesn't just charge you for the labor. They hand you a bill for the entire cost of a brand new car, which includes the parts you already owned.
I mean, it sounds completely absurd when you frame it that way. Any reasonable person would just point to the trunk and absolutely refuse to pay for their own property.
Exactly. Yet, according to the incredibly dense and frankly legally explosive stack of documents we are unpacking today, that exact scenario is allegedly playing out right now on a global scale.
Yeah, but with much higher stakes.
Way higher. Because the car in this scenario is the United States military, the mechanics are the biggest tech and defense contractors on the planet, and the bill is being footed by your taxpayer dollars.
It's a massive claim.
It really is. Today, we are doing a deep dive into a sprawling manifesto, patent portfolio, and legal dossier titled The Atomic Express: Why the U.S. military is paying twice for its best inventions.
And this source text alone is just a fascinating artifact to dig into. It was compiled by a guy named R.J. Aguar. He's a former managing director at Goldman Sachs and a former Google search ranking staff engineer.
So he really knows his stuff.
Right. He brings this incredible dual perspective to the dossier. He understands the nuts and bolts of global finance, but he also intimately understands the bleeding edge of computing architecture.
Yeah.
And the documents outline how he is using that specific overlap to wage this legally binding asymmetric campaign against what he claims are systemic inefficiencies in the whole military-industrial complex.
Which brings us to the cover art of the document because it sets a very distinct tone for those claims right out of the gate.
Oh yeah, it's intense.
It features a modern twist on that famous 19th century painting, The Devil's Checkmate. But instead of a traditional chess match, the pieces on the board include an F-35 fighter jet and a nuclear-powered train being captured.
It's a very bold visual statement to introduce a legal filing, that's for sure.
Definitely. Now, before we get too deep, we should establish very clearly that we are analyzing this text entirely impartially.
Right. We are not taking sides here.
No, not at all. We aren't endorsing these allegations or, predicting whether they will ultimately hold up in federal court. Our mission today is just to explore the mechanics of this brilliant legal strategy documented in these pages, and of course, the incredible sci-fi sounding technologies hidden within it.
Which is really where the whole thing starts.
Yeah.
The entire strategy hinges on this very specific legal mechanism regarding intellectual property.
Okay, so let's unpack that. How does one inventor plan to hold the world's biggest contractors accountable?
Well, to understand that, we first have to look at what's called the Aguar-Marcano intellectual property portfolio. According to the dossier, he has patented 52 foundational architectures.
And these aren't just like basic consumer apps, right?
No, not at all. We're talking about the deep plumbing of modern technology. Things like optical computing, mobile network stacking, high bandwidth data exchange, real foundational stuff.
The kind of patents that major tech firms and defense contractors usually spend billions to develop internally or just acquire outright.
Exactly. And normally, if the U.S. government decides they absolutely need a piece of proprietary technology for national defense, they have a tool for that. They can invoke eminent domain.
Right, so they just seize the patent for national security purposes and figure out the financial compensation later.
Correct. And that process typically shields the defense contractors from third-party patent infringement lawsuits while they're building these systems for the military.
But the author apparently foresaw that exact process and he short-circuited it.
He really did. Instead of waiting for eminent domain to kick in, he proactively went to the United States federal government and granted them a perpetual, irrevocable, royalty-free, worldwide license to use all 52 of his inventions for free.
Wait, so he just handed over the keys? Like, here you go, have at it.
He just handed them over.
Yeah.
Which creates this fascinating jurisprudential paradox, right? Because if the government already owns the right to use this technology indefinitely for free, they owe zero royalties to anyone.
Ah, okay, so that sets the trap.
Exactly. And now, the dossier contains these formal, legally binding claims specifically under DFARS, which is the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement, alleging that companies like Apple, Google, Meta, and systems integrators like SAIC are actively building tech for the military using his patented methods.
So going back to our analogy, he's claiming that major contractors are essentially packaging up this tech, selling it to the military, and baking in the costs of R&D and intellectual property licensing.
Yes. They are allegedly charging the Pentagon a premium for assets the Pentagon already possesses the license to use.
Okay, but let me push back on that for a second. If the military has this free license just sitting in a file cabinet somewhere, you would assume a contracting officer would just look at an invoice from Lockheed Martin, point to the license, and say, hey, drop the price. We already own this.
You would think so.
Right. I mean, how do multi-billion-dollar contracts get signed without someone noticing this overlap?
Well, the dossier argues that they slip through because of how siloed the procurement bureaucracy is. I mean, the U.S. military is incomprehensibly massive.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So a contracting officer whose job is to buy next-generation communication arrays doesn't inherently have cross-departmental visibility into a raw patent grant that was submitted to some entirely different legal division. The left hand simply doesn't know what the right hand has licensed.
So the inefficiency isn't necessarily malicious at the ground level, it's just the reality of a super fragmented bureaucracy.
Right. And the author's tactic is basically weaponizing that very bureaucracy to force visibility. He's blasting these verified, cryptographically time-stamped DFARS emails directly to the top brass.
Like who?
Like the Secretary of Defense, the Chief Technology Officer, the heads of contracting commands. He is consolidating that information at the very top.
Stripping away their plausible deniability.
Exactly. Because under federal procurement law, once a warranted contracting officer receives verified, documented proof that a contractor might be charging for freely available IP, they are legally mandated to act.
Oh, wow. So they have no choice.
None. It forces a mandatory federal cost accounting audit. Ignoring a formally filed DFARS claim actually exposes those officers to severe administrative or even criminal liability for complicity in procurement fraud.
That is a brilliant legal checkmate. He shifts the burden of proof entirely. He doesn't have to spend years suing Apple or Google directly. He just has to force the government to audit its own receipts.
That's the masterstroke.
Okay, so that's the legal trap. Let's dig into exactly what technologies are allegedly being misappropriated here. The dossier calls out specific sectors of Silicon Valley, right? Starting with mobile tech and VR.
Yeah, it specifically names Apple, Google, and Meta in this section. The claims here focus heavily on what he calls de-anonymizing radio frequencies.
Which means what exactly for the military?
Well, in modern tactical environments, relying on standard mobile data signals is a huge liability. Baseband processors in commercial devices are constantly pinging cell towers.
All right, looking for a signal.
And that creates a traceable spectral footprint. The dossier claims that major operating systems are deploying distributed sensor arrays that track device coordinates in a way that directly overlaps with his pre-licensed patents for securing those signals.
And there is also a major focus on tactical VR headsets, which is where it gets really sci-fi. The text details claims regarding high bandwidth, free space optical data exchange. Because, I mean, think about it. If a tactical team is operating in a contested environment, standard radio frequencies can be instantly intercepted, triangulated, or jammed by an adversary. You can't just stream massive amounts of 3D situational data over Wi-Fi.
No, absolutely not. The alternative is using short-range, unguided lasers optical connections to transmit data between the devices.
So literally flashing light back and forth.
Right. And Agwire alleges that the advanced wireless streaming protocols and proximity-based file transfer systems being developed by these tech giants mirror his patented spatial light architecture.
Bypassing interceptable radio waves entirely.
Exactly.
But the dossier doesn't just stop at how data moves, it also tackles how it is stored. It outlines this architecture called the Diosdado GeoIndex.
This is one of the most fascinating parts.
Yeah, because traditional military data storage usually relies on centralized databases or heavily encrypted cloud servers, which, if you think about it, essentially act as giant static targets for adversarial hackers.
Right. Everybody knows where the vault is.
Exactly. But the Diosdado system proposes steganographically embedding data into geographical coordinates instead.
And for anyone unfamiliar with the mechanics of steganography, it's very different from encryption. Encryption scrambles data into a lockbox, but the hacker still knows the lockbox exists. Steganography hides the data in plain sight.
Right, like taking a super high-resolution digital photograph of a landscape and just slightly altering the color values of random pixels to represent lines of text.
Exactly. To anyone looking, it's just a picture. But to a system that knows the pattern, it's a hidden document.
And the dossier proposes doing this with geographic coordinate data, literally anchoring military intelligence to physical space rather than central servers. And he alleges secure core storage subsystems currently being sold to the military are utilizing this exact infrastructure.
Which is a massive claim. But while the data storage and transmission stuff is huge, the most severe allegations in the dossier are directed at the heavy compute and AI sector.
Yeah, this is where the names get even bigger.
The text explicitly calls out companies like NVIDIA, Intel, Palantir, and Lockheed Martin. This whole section explores the impending structural obsolescence of legacy silicon.
Right, because modern computer chips, which rely on copper buses and binary code, are approaching a hard physical limit. As you try to pack more and more transistors onto a tiny silicon chip to handle heavy AI processing, the copper generates way too much heat and just consumes too much power.
It physically can't keep up.
Mm.
So Aguar's patents propose abandoning silicon entirely for something called high-radix optical computing.
Okay, let's break that down because high radix fundamentally changes the mathematics of processing, right?
It does. Traditional binary computing relies on electrical signal switching on and off, ones and zeros. It's a two-state system.
Right.
But high-radix optical computing uses light instead of electricity. And because light can be split into multiple wavelengths or colors, a single optical connection can represent multiple states simultaneously rather than just on or off.
It's like the difference between a single-lane road where cars can only drive forward or stop, and a massive multi-level highway where traffic flows in 12 different directions at the exact same time without ever colliding.
That's a great way to put it. The throughput just increases exponentially.
But wait, if I'm reading this right, he's not just saying, hey, you stole my faster computer code. He's saying this exponential leap introduces a terrifying security implication.
Yes. What the dossier calls the threat of asymmetric decryption.
Right. Because current encryption protocols, the algorithms securing top secret military communications and all global banking networks, they rely on the fact that standard binary computers take an impossibly long time to guess massive prime number factorization problems.
Decades, or even centuries, for a normal computer. But a high-radix optical computer wouldn't have to guess sequentially. Its parallel processing capacity is so vast that it could theoretically brute force those complex mathematical problems almost instantly.
Meaning it could pick every digital lock the military owns? Is he presenting this as a financial audit or a national security warning?
It's absolutely both. He is formally warning the Pentagon that the architectural blueprints for these optical processors exist within his patents, and the U.S. government already holds the free license to develop them.
Wow.
But if a foreign adversary accesses those patents and builds a high-radix optical compute network before the DoD successfully transitions away from vulnerable legacy silicon chips, the entire global balance of power tips overnight.
Oh.
Every encrypted defense array the U.S. operates would be completely compromised.
That is genuinely terrifying. But building that computing paradigm requires a massive physical infrastructure capable of supporting it. You cannot run a high-radix optical intelligence network on, like, standard diesel generators or commercial lithium-ion batteries.
No, the power demands would be insane.
Which leads us directly into the flagship invention that actually gives the dossier its title, the Atomic Express.
This is patent application 19,699,028, and it is described as a distributed nuclear-powered logistics system.
Just the name Atomic Express sounds like something out of a comic book, but it's very real. Instead of a normal transport train with standard internal combustion engines, picture a lead vehicle powered by a generation of feet molten salt reactor.
A rolling, mobile nuclear power plant.
Exactly.
And molten salt reactors are particularly suited for this because of their safety profile. Unlike older pressurized water reactors, they operate at near atmospheric pressure, which drastically reduces the risk of an explosive breach.
Okay, so you have this small modular reactor generating megawatts of constant electricity, and it sends that power down a high voltage power bus to a whole chain of auxiliary transport units.
This is where the decentralized optical computing brain we just talked about integrates with the physical machinery. In a normal train or convoy, the lead vehicle basically drags the dead weight of everything behind it.
Right, the engine pulls the carts.
But in the Atomic Express, every single transport unit in the chain has its own electric motor and its own computing node.
So it's not dragging dead weight, it's like a centipede. Instead of the head dragging a heavy body, every single leg has its own brain and muscles, constantly talking to the other legs so they all push and pull in perfect harmony.
That is exactly the concept. And the way they communicate is through the physical hitches connecting these vehicles. They contain piezoelectric strain gauge sensors.
Piezoelectric, meaning
And they possess a unique physical property where if you squeeze them or stretch them, they generate an electrical charge.
oh, wow.
So as the convoy drives over uneven terrain, the physical pulling and pushing on the hitches translates directly into a continuous stream of electrical data.
And the computing mesh network reads that data in real time. So if a hitch detects too much tension, the system instantly tells the electric motors on the individual units to adjust their torque down the line.
Creating a state of zero tension. No single coupler ever takes the full mechanical weight of the convoy.
That is brilliant. And that coordination allows the system to perform what the patent describes as kinetic energy arbitrage.
Right, which sounds complicated, but it's basically recycling physics. If the convoy is navigating a steep mountain pass, the units that are already descending the slope utilize their gravitational momentum and regenerative braking to generate power.
Ah, and then that power is fed back into the shared high-voltage grid to physically and electrically assist the units that are still struggling up the hill.
Precisely. The system constantly balances its own kinetic energy.
And the dossier outlines how this architecture, which is branded as the Marcello loop, can be adapted way beyond just land transport. It proposes multimodal applications, things like the atomic ferry for maritime ships, continuous in-air recharging systems for drone swarms, and even orbital logistics arrays in space.
But the underlying strategic military value of the Marcello loop is achieving supply chain sovereignty.
Supply chain sovereignty, meaning not relying on other countries for materials.
Yes, exactly. Currently, the entire transition to electric transport fleets relies on massive, heavy lithium-ion battery packs. That heavily tethers the United States' logistical capabilities to foreign mineral cartels that control the refinement of lithium.
Right. But the dossier claims this architecture reduces the required lithium footprint by 90%. How is that possible?
Because the nuclear reactor provides the heavy, continuous baseload power. The individual transport units only require small, 50-mile fail-safe batteries to act as a temporary electrical buffer, rather than these massive primary power packs.
Oh, I see.
The text actually notes that you could build 10 of these synchronized autonomous units using the identical mineral footprint of just a single traditional commercial electric semi-truck.
That completely changes the math on electric logistics. Plus, you have all that excess megawatt power generated by the reactor, which the text details could power an infinite magazine air defense shield.
Which is just wild to think about. It's just that the convoy could power rolling arrays of directed energy weapons like lasers and high-powered microwave jammers.
Weapons that operate without any ammunition constraints, limited only by the reactor's massive output.
Right, and if that defensive shield somehow gets overwhelmed, the system employs what it calls a ghost convoy survivability feature.
Okay, what is a ghost convoy?
Well, if the road ahead gets destroyed by an adversarial strike, a normal convoy just halts and becomes a static target, right?
Yeah, they're stuck.
But the optical computing mesh here instantly triggers the hitches to decouple. The individual units then use those small 50-mile fail-safe batteries to just scatter off-road, autonomously navigate around the blast zone, and seamlessly recouple on the other side.
Wow, it is a supply chain that physically cannot be broken.
Exactly.
Okay, but listen,
Yeah.
you don't just try to disrupt multi-billion-dollar contracts and introduce nuclear-powered logistical networks without making waves. The dossier claims this whole legal maneuver has triggered some intense, real-world blowback.
It absolutely has, according to the documents. The final section of the text includes these notices of potential retaliatory mechanisms that Aguirre sent to the military brass.
So what exactly is the alleged blowback?
He outlines a very synchronized chronological pattern. He claims that immediately following his filing of these legally binding DFARS protections with the Pentagon, highly irregular legal actions began materializing against him in a local domestic relations court in Texas.
Specifically, the 387th District Court in Fort Bend County. Right.
Yes.
Okay, wait, this sounds like a spy thriller. A local family court being used to seize military-grade cryptographic keys. Let's stay objective here. What is the author's actual goal by looping the Pentagon into local court drama?
Well, he details allegations of manual docket alterations, sophisticated service evasion tactics, and the issuance of pocket warrants. And the alleged objective of these localized legal maneuvers is to force him into a position where he must physically surrender his corporate computing hardware.
The hardware that contains the proprietary source code for these pre-licensed federal defense assets.
Exactly. So by putting the DoD on notice, Aguar is synthesizing his strategy.
Yeah.
He's transforming a local legal dispute into a federal national security issue. He is explicitly warning the Pentagon. If my hardware gets seized by bad actors, your pre-licensed tech is compromised. You need to intervene to protect your own assets.
That is a brilliant way to force their hand. He isn't just asking for help. He's telling the DoD that protecting his hardware is synonymous with protecting their own next-generation technological infrastructure.
Right. If the local court succeeds in seizing the drives, the pre-licensed federal asset is exposed to adversaries.
It really is a masterclass in exploiting systemic vulnerabilities.
It is. The military-industrial complex is so immense, making it incredibly prone to the exact type of siloed inefficiencies the author targets. The text really demonstrates how the rigid rules designed to govern that massive machine can be totally manipulated by someone who truly understands the administrative levers.
Which brings up a final provocative thought to mull over as we close out today's deep dive. Whether you are a taxpayer, a tech enthusiast, or just someone fascinated by logistics, this dossier challenges everything we know about power. We are so accustomed to measuring global military dominance by kinetic power, stealth bombers, carrier strike groups, troop sizes, but this dossier suggests a very different battleground for the 21st century.
Yeah, a bureaucratic one.
Right. What if the ultimate weapon in the 21st century isn't a bomb at all? What if the most powerful tool for disrupting the global world order and reshaping military infrastructure is simply a perfectly filed, impeccably timed patent application that exploits the very bureaucracy designed to protect it?
It makes you wonder, as the technology scales exponentially, the administrative frameworks governing it might actually be the true front line.
It really does. Thank you all so much for joining us on this deep dive into the Atomic Express. We hope it gave you a lot to think about. Keep questioning the systems around you and keep exploring.